Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Crosstalk. And looking back over my time doing this, I can't help but remember the time that Corgi Legume joined Teddy Plank on the show, and they had a jaw harp off for 3 straight hours to protest the removal of Jeff Goldblum from the Natural Thigh Museum of Ghent. Then there was that time my conversation with the Archduke of Des Moines, Lenny Flanarski, ended in controversy when he dramatically set fire to a picture of Alan Splinge, a used furniture salesman from Ames, who had dated his daughter for a few weeks and refused to pay for some eggs at a family event in a Chili's parking lot. And then there was the time Ophelia Binge Couplet forgot that her camera was still on when she walked into her kitchen to find her live-in help wearing a duck costume, eating vast quantities of frozen pineapple out of a Wellington boot, and screaming about communism. So many great times and so many classic moments. Okay, so on to our guest today, and what can be said about this towering and phenomenal individual? Well, he's a self-confessed comic, tech, and TV nerd, a film fan, a mixologist, a podcaster, and a member of one of the coolest races on the planet, Canadians. He also happens to be my cousin. He's Michael Goldberg, and he's coming live from Winnipeg. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure. The pleasure is all mine, as they say. Yeah, it's fantastic to have you on the show, sir. Did I miss anything from your introduction out? Is there
I think you added a great deal, and I appreciate it. I'll try to live up to some of it right now.
No, you definitely will. It's all good. It's all good, sir. So what I wanted to do was we talked about sort of the movies that made you and things like that. But I also would love to kind of talk about the fact that, so as I said in our intro, we're cousins.
Yes.
And
which we kind of only found out, like, what is it, about 10 years ago now?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, well, I always knew you were my cousin, but we only kind of really
met about 10, I think about 10 years ago now.
Yeah, there was one memory I have where we're all very young, maybe 8 or 9-ish, and weirdly enough, my memory is that we were down in like Southsea or somewhere near the coast in England, and I think your mum and dad were visiting. I'm going back like
going way back
32 years. But no, the reason why I bring it up is obviously one of the things that we always talk about is the fact that for years, my mum certainly, and maybe your parents as well, but would say, you really should get in touch with Michael and Seth because you guys like the same stuff, but you're separated, by thousands of miles. You've never met except this one time that I have a dim memory of, but we like all the same kind of stuff. And we kind of had I think a weirdly similar trajectory in terms of coming to pop culture.
Yeah.
But I don't know the full story. We've obviously shared stuff we're into and things like that, but I thought it would be interesting to kind of, if we talk about your journey, I can then kind of go, oh, okay, so that's when you got into that, and that's how you.
So, I mean, obviously, one of the really big things that you and I share is a love of B-horror movies, and one in particular, or one series in particular, which is the Evil Dead series. And I got into the Evil Dead series watching Army of Darkness first, which I think actually a lot of people got into because it was, I don't want to say like the more popular, but I think it was probably the more published version. And it used to run on like the Movie Network back in the old days of the Movie Network when you had to have a descrambler or actually pay to get it, but we had a descrambler. But I remember being sick from school a whole bunch of times as a kid, and like you'd go downstairs and it's Army of Darkness and no one else is around. It's like, all right, perfect. And you watch this like really cheesy, terrible B-horror movie, but it starts off with this monologue where you're like supposed to know what happens. And it wasn't until years later that I suddenly find out, it's actually the third part of a trilogy.
Right.
That is only loosely a trilogy because we keep changing things in the story.
Right. And it's weird. So my experience is almost identical to that. It's certainly in terms of order. What's odd about my experience with Army of Darkness is I have a definite memory. And again, this may come into play that my brain maybe is a bit messed up. I have a definite memory that when I was at boarding school for some of my childhood, and we used to be able to rent any video that they had that wasn't an 18, that was either a PG or a 15 back then, from a local. There was like a very small local tobacconist near the train station near my school, because my school was in the middle of nowhere, but they had like one wall, like one shelf of videos. And I have a very strong memory of seeing Army of Darkness in the rec room of my high school boarding school. What's weird is I have a memory of seeing it when I was like 12, but that can't be the case, because the movie didn't come out in the UK till 93, which makes me 13. And therefore it didn't come out on VHS till I was 14. So I'm not, I don't know how I saw it.
hold on. Army, when did it actually, it was 1992. I mean, is it possible there was a bootleg copy sitting around the old store?
I mean, possibly. I mean, if it came out in the UK in, like, let's say it came out in the UK on video at the same time as it came out in the cinemas in the US. But that didn't happen back in the day. Like, it happens now on like DVD and stuff, but it didn't happen back in the day on VHS. VHS came out like years after the movie actually played. So, but I have a memory. I remember the video cover, because in the UK they had the Medieval Dead video cover with the 17 abs and the
chainsaw over his head. Yeah.
So I remember that like vividly when I was like 12, and it was around the time that we were renting stuff like Gods Must Be Crazy and Beastmaster and all those. Like, there seemed to be a swarm of early 90s either comedy or comedy horror or comedy sword and sandal films that were all very kind of desert based. Like, I
think it was just cheap shooting in Arizona.
Right, exactly. So I definitely came to Army of Darkness first, and my memory of it was that the thing that went off in my brain once Ash started spouting the one-liners was, oh wait, they make movies for me. Like, that, I remember. Do you know what I mean? Like, I remember thinking.
I mean, I think. You hit that age where you're just like, it's no longer about. There's kind of, I think you go through kind of like stages and everything. You start off with, the kid movies that your parents want you to see because they're friendly and they're nice and they have some sort of moralistic story or something like that. That's usually where we begin with our movies. Usually, you kind of start to develop a sense, but you develop it usually based off of what your parents like, because then they start showing you the movies that were really influential in their lives. I grew up with my British father, who would introduce me to Monty Python and all of the Python stuff. And Python became a huge part of that, which meant that you kind of grew up with this very sarcastic, ridiculous, this lunacy in movies. And you think of Search for the Holy Grail as a perfect example. Like, what the hell is with the enchanter Tim? What is with the guy who guards the bridge? Why is it that the movie ends with everyone being arrested? Like, there's just weird shit that happens in this movie for no reason whatsoever. Right. But you start growing up with that, and then all of a sudden you find, okay, well, obviously I like action movies because they're fun and they're exciting, and you get to see some blood and guts and gore. And then you come across this movie that has a weird sensibility that seems completely outlandish, that has stop motion animation sword fights, that has a hero sort of that gets duplicated, who turns into the arch villain, and you get those one-liners, and you're just like, yeah, I'm home. I need this.
It's such Army of Darkness is such a perfect film for film nerds, even before they maybe know that they're film nerds, because it literally throws everything but the kitchen sink at the screen and hopes a bunch of it sticks. You know what I mean? Like, it has the parody braggart hero that is kind of a total play on sort of the Errol Flynn type kind of
absolutely.
It has, like you say, it has every effect that you could possibly do on a budget by 1992. So it has, rear projection, stop motion animation. It has prosthetics. It has gore effects. It has location stuff. It has all that kind of stuff. It has an insanely mad premise. It has comedy. It has horror. It has action. It has stuff that hasn't even been categorized yet.
And it has two endings, depending on where you saw it.
Right.
Which was the craziest damn thing in the world, like for many years, you talk to people, and unless I think it was one of those things that it was the first movie I can recall being obsessed with, obsessed to the point of like, I need to know how this was done. I need to know who these people are. And it wasn't just a matter of knowing like more about Bruce Campbell, though he's awesome in this and he's kind of just awesome. But it's also a matter of like, okay, well, who's Sam Raimi and where the hell did he come from and what the hell is he doing and all of this stuff. And I started picking up whatever books and DVDs I could find, and it's terrible. Like, it's ridiculous because I have, I think, 4 or 5 versions of Army of Darkness because they kept putting out different versions of this thing. Yep. And I actually have like they put one in like a plasticky leather Necronomicon that I have.
Well, I have Evil Dead 1 and 2 both in the Necronomicon packages. And they put an Army of Darkness out in a Necronom package, but I thought it was only in Australia. But I did not import that because by that point I already had like a Blu-ray version of it, 3 DVD versions of it, and like several VHS versions of it. I definitely was one that. So my trajectory with the franchise was Army of Darkness. Oh my God, absolutely love it. Become obsessed. Who are these people? How does a movie like this get made, etc. Then it was, my next memory is that when I was about 16, I'm at sixth form college, because in the UK, obviously, they go to college between 16 and 18. If you don't finish out in boarding school like I didn't, I'd left at that point. And HMV were having a sale in my local town that was 3 VHS for 12 quid. And they had Army of Darkness as one of the, because the UK was one of the few territories where all 3 movies were put out or owned by the same people by that point, which was Forefront Video. Okay. I know in other territories, Army of Darkness is owned by one group of people, MGM in Asia and Universal over here and blah, 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 blah. And then Evil Dead 1 and 2 are owned by different people, and therefore they could never be put out in a box set. I go into HMV, I see Army of Darkness, which I recognize, on VHS, and next to it with exactly the same like typeface and everything on the cover, Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead 1, right? All in like a thing, and it's 3 for 12 quid. And I was like, okay, I'm buying that. Like, that was my first set. I still have it, but that was my first set. And I remember at that point, I had seen Evil Dead 2 late night on Channel 4, because they always did their like band season or whatever on Channel 4, because it was the sort of more edgy, controversial channel in the UK. So I had seen Evil Dead 2 on TV, and I'd obviously like seen Army of Darkness a bunch. I'd never seen Evil Dead 1. And I remember, because that again was like banned and edited and all sorts of stuff in the UK for the longest time. In fact, the first 3 VHS versions I had of Evil Dead 1, I'll tell you, I bought a lot of them. All of them were edited. It wasn't until I got the Anchor Bay, whatever it was, the 30th anniversary, or maybe the 25th anniversary Anchor Bay VHS that came out. That was the first thing that I had that was uncut. That had the whole tree scene in it and everything.
Oh, the tree rape scene in the first one? Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember watching the first one and knowing that the second one's super goofy and violent and weird, and knowing that the third one is basically a comedy film. I sat down by myself in my apartment at the time to watch Evil Dead 1 by myself. And within about 30 minutes, I was like, Jesus, this is like actually really scary.
Like, what I love about it is you go back and you look at, I think it became part of the reason that I became obsessed with it was the differences between everything. So you watch Evil Dead and you have a group of people who go up to the cabin and all this terrible stuff happens. And it is more of a horror thing. And when you read about it later on, you find out, well, that's what Rami was going for. He had gone to a whole bunch of horrors to sort of see what scared people and how it worked and try to get this technical understanding of it. And then he goes off and he shoots the movie. for really cheap, and a whole bunch of people didn't get their actor permission, and there's a whole bunch of other stories with that one. But then you start watching the second one, and it retcons the first movie in the first 5 minutes, and you're just like, but what is going on here? And you kind of like stop, and you're just like, why did you just retcon an entire movie? And it's what drew me into like starting to look into the history of this thing, was like, how did we end up with a completely different start to the story? And then you watch this movie, and it is far more goofy and like over the top, and I feel like plays into Bruce Campbell's character a little bit more. And then you get this third movie, which has a completely different name. It makes mention of the original stuff, but not really, and then kind of carries it on. And you're just like, this is super weird, and all of it is fantastic.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, I absolutely love it, and I love the kind of trajectory of the series. And whether it's just because I'm weird, or just because I dialed into it at such a young age, I understood it. Like, I got the trajectory without even. I mean, later I would buy The Evil Dead Companion, and I would read Bruce's book, and I had the DVDs. So I started to learn, obviously, through all that material, kind of how it was all put together. But watching them as a trilogy and watching them independently of each other, for whatever reason, I was dialed into whatever they were dialed into when they were making the decisions they were making. And I don't know, I can't really describe what it is. Now, in terms of Python, because obviously your dad brought Python with him.
Oh, yes. Not just Python, but yeah.
But yeah, that whole Anglo
stuff. Yeah.
The comedy stuff. And I remember your dad visiting me years ago in Exeter and bringing an entire cheese plate with him. He'd obviously gone to like a supermarket or a store or something and bought like a massive cheese plate with him. And was like, John, I brought you the cheese shop. That was his joke.
It's one of his favorites. It's one of his favorite sketches, and it still is one of mine too. It's just so. I mean, you know, you've got the parrot sketch, which everyone should know because it is one of the greatest comedy sketches of all times. But Python just had those bits, and it was the cheese shop is absolutely fantastic, and it is one of those things where it was like, okay, we wrote a sketch, but we need to transition out of the sketch. How do we do it? Oh, we'll just shoot the guy.
Yeah, right. But no, when I said earlier about Army of Darkness and seeing Army of Darkness and going, oh, they make movies for me. I had seen, you know, all of Python stuff, and I had seen Holy Grail, Life of Brian. I hadn't seen Meaning of Life at that point, but I'd seen Life of Brian and Holy Grail. Knew that there was sort of comedy movies out there and parody movies out there, and there was sort of certainly an area for me to be like, oh, okay, you know, if I need my like weird comedy fix, there's that. But and I didn't have film fan parents. I mean, my mum watches movies and my dad watched movies, but not to any kind of degree. I mean, I'm talking about like James Bond stuff at Christmas, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, but I knew from having seen either Indiana Jones or James Bond or that kind of stuff growing up, Labyrinth, those kind of movies that we would see. Weirdly enough, again, my junior school, when I was like 6 or 7, if it rained on a Wednesday afternoon, which was like sports afternoon, they would throw a sheet up in the music room and put movies on. Like, I don't know how I got so lucky, but I saw Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom when I was like 7 at school.
I remember hiding behind chairs in that last seat. I couldn't deal with that one.
They ripped a dude's heart out when I was like, when you were saying earlier that like, oh, when you start off into movies, it's all family friendly stuff. I totally get where you're coming from. I've certainly seen that trajectory in like my younger sister and my nieces and nephews and stuff. But no, for me, like I don't have any memories of sitting down and watching Disney films. I mean, I remember seeing Basil the Great Mouse Detective for the first time because I was a
great movie.
Sherlock Holmes nut. But I don't remember a kid-friendly upbringing. I remember Monty Python and all that insanity. And then on the flip side, I remember Indiana Jones and Labyrinth is family friendly, but it's also totally
really dark, like really dark in a lot of ways. Love that movie. So I mean, look, dad worked with Jim Henson, so I kind of grew up in that kind of world as well, and so the Muppets played a really big role in my upbringing, because it was you had the Muppet Show, which you don't realize what you're watching until many years later. I go back and I rewatch the Muppet Show now, and what this is old vaudeville variety shows. Like that's what the framing of the show is these vaudeville sketches. They don't have anything to connect with. It's just these little bits and pieces, and it's fun and it's great and it's goofy.
But also with the best celebrities and performers of the 20th century, like hands down the best. Like you name someone,
you look at the list of people that came through that thing, and you're just like, this is amazing. You got some of the biggest names in comedy and music and in theater to perform with puppets for however long it took to actually shoot these things. But like, it's just so over the top and it's great. And I mean, I still go back. One of my favorite sketches from the show is still Milton Berle and him trying to do the sketch with Statler and Waldorf heckling him, because it's just like, it's so ridiculous. And all the lines are brilliant. And you can tell that the writing was really well done and the pacing is great. And there's something wonderful about seeing a frog lose its mind at not being able to control a show. There's something wonderful about all the other characters as they're trying to like live their lives and just in this insanity of a live performance show. And I think it's part of the reason that I ended up in working in television, though I work in news rather than in variety or anything like that. But I think part of it is there's something about doing live TV that the show actually captures to a certain extent. There is a bit of a manic personality when you're doing that.
Share of Kermit moments behind the scenes.
Oh my god, it only gets weirder as I get older. I have done the flailed hands a few times. And I own two Muppets now because they in New York City they used to have the Muppet Whatnot Workshop at FAO Schwartz. And I bought, when it first opened, I bought a Muppet, and then years later I bought a second Muppet. So both of them are right now at my office, which I haven't been to in about 7 weeks. And I miss my characters. It's bad because it's like I'm used to sort of like I kind of want to go get them and bring them home, but I am worried that if I do, I'm just going to end up having conversations with myself, talking to a Muppet, and it's going to be
Muppets. But that's fine. Oh, yeah. That's allowed.
Is it?
I think
it
is.
That's a problem.
Listen, man, when we're considering the world around us, you sat at home talking to some Muppets. That's like, to me, that's glorious compared to everything that's going on. I really don't think you should be worried.
Just picturing business phone calls right now, and it's like, Michael, what do you think? Michael's busy right now, but I'll chime in.
I'll answer. Hello. Completely. But I still think that in the environment that we're in, that would still be the least craziest thing I've heard in the last 72 hours. So we both have the Python British humor thing in common, because I remember '89 was Python's 20th anniversary. They did Parrot Sketch Not Included with Steve Martin, and they had a bunch of documentaries on BBC TV. So it was like my parents just sat me down in front of that, and it was constantly beamed into my brain for a few years, which was glorious. And along with sort of all the other sort of British comedy. And at the same time, I was, long before the internet, I was a reference book fanatic. So if anyone had written anything about Python or written anything about movies or written anything about British comedy, I found it somehow in like a secondhand bookshop or a regular bookshop or whatever. I had a great one that was From Fringe to Flying Circus, which literally tracked everything from Beyond the Fringe, which was sort of the first wave of the Oxbridge comedy, all the way through to Flying Circus and beyond. And it had he had interviewed everyone, Marty Feldman and Jonathan Miller and Peter Cook and Dudley Moore and all the Pythons. And like, it was a phenomenal book. So
I think people don't realize like the royalty as well, that kind of like working with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore and kind of the way that helps shape Python and Cleese and all of these guys. It's, Dad had the radio series, I'm sorry, I'll read that again.
Yeah.
Like, he had every episode on tape. And years later, I found a digital version of them all and shared it with him. I think for Dad as well, like, I remember when YouTube was just getting started. Well, it was a thing that it was like we all knew about it, but our parents didn't necessarily. And I remember helping Dad with the presentation at one point. And he was like, we were working on something, and he was like, oh, there was this great song I remember as a kid. It was a comedy show, and they had this song called Great Video Sorry About the Song, or something along those lines. And it was this whole thing about, like, the video was fantastic, the music was shit.
It's not the 9 o'clock news. Nice video, shame about the song. It's one of my favorites. I love that. I listen to it all the time.
Well, Dad was like, oh, it'd be awesome if I could play it here. And I'm like, give me 5 minutes. And I go online. There it is on YouTube. This old British. And he's just like, how is that just something you can pull up? And I'm like, it's the wonders of the new age.
So I have this interesting theory, and it's only because I've certainly noticed recently, sort of talking as I get older, I guess, but talking to people now who are obviously, I can talk to people who are 20 years younger than me now, and kind of seeing something that since the internet age, one would assume, because now everything is available online and all the information you could ever want is online, that people would know more, would learn more, would have more references. And I'm just talking about pop culture right now. But and where I'm coming from is, like, when the 20th anniversary of Python happened, and then a few years later when the Beatles anthology was on British TV. So I'm between the ages of like 9 and 14 at this point, that kind of era. I already knew that, like, Python and the Beatles were two big fandoms for me. And when Python talked about the comedy that influenced them, I would run away and be like, okay, how do I get hold of this? How do I get hold of that? How do I get hold of what Cleese did before Python? How do I get hold of Beyond the Fringe, or whether it's the vinyl albums, whether it's the cassette tapes, whether it's the books that I could find, or whatever it was? Because it wasn't just about the thing that existed, Python. It was about, how did that thing come into play, and how do I get more of it, but with different people, right? Same with the Beatles anthology. It was like, when they mentioned Big Bill Broonzy or Bo Diddley or any of these guys that influenced Chuck Berry, Elvis, whatever, I'm like, right, these are the people I need to now go listen to kind of understand where that music came from, right? And similarly with Evil Dead, like when I got really into Evil Dead, I wanted to know where it came from, who the people were, blah, 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 blah. And you had to go, like, searching for it, Yes. I remember ordering Bruce Campbell's second ever movie, going back on VHS from a warehouse in the States, but I was in like a little rinky-dink video shop in the UK, secondhand video shop in the UK, and they had a Yellow Pages style ordering book that they had to, like, go through to see if they had it. But I got all this stuff, and, like, pop culture becomes like this kind of spider web that is built, where it kind of, you start adding on stuff and you realize who interacts with who and da-da-da-da-da. I would assume now that all that spider web is online, that more people would have, like, more of that stuff, more of that knowledge, and more of that interest. But interacting online, but also talking to people nowadays, and this is not just me being a grumpy old man, it's just something I've noticed. I don't see people doing the research or doing the, like, thing. I see them being fans of something, but then it kind of ending. Like, I'm a fan of this, that's it, I'll stick to this, and boom. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, because I do think that people are, because what ends up happening is less about exploring the making of it, and it becomes more about exploring the similarity in something else. So you get people who are really, really into Evil Dead, and it's like, okay, instead of, what inspired the originals or anything like that, what inspired this, it's more becomes, okay, well, what's like it that I'm going to see? So it's not going back and watching the old Errol Flynn movies, which aren't really like it. It's not the same humor, but you can tell that there are aspects of those movies that influence the way Rami,
or Ray Harryhausen, or
yeah. So there's So it's less about exploring the origins, almost, if we were talking language, it'd be the etymology, but it's like it's look instead of looking at that, we're looking at like, okay, what's the synonym to this
Right.
movie?
Yeah. All people seem to want is sort of sequels and remakes, which I kind of get that urge, but at the same time, I'm like, I there is such a wealth of stuff out there. Even if you just say 80s horror, right? And then you look at 80s horror and you break it down into all the sort of mad subgenres and all the other filmmakers you could go find out. Even if you just started with the masters of horror and you went with Stuart Gordon, Don Coscarelli, Sam Raimi, John Carpenter, whatever it is. Even if you just start watching that stuff, there's an education right there. Like before you even want to kind of
go to the Kaufman stuff and the trauma and like,
right.
The ridiculousness that comes out of everything there, and how it does influence like storytelling and creativity and all of these things, because people saw this guy making movies for cheap and doing moderately well, but creating a fan base that you could just, slap your logo on and suddenly it's a cult hit. And there is something, I remember seeing, so Toxic Avenger, obviously fantastically fun movie, and I highly recommend.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. But I have a friend of mine who comes on here all the time talking about trauma, Jay Mayo from Massachusetts. He's a huge trauma head, and I knew trauma growing up as well.
I used to have, I don't think I have it anymore, but I used to have the Make Your Own Damn Movie. Which it's a fun book, but it is basically just like, I made a bunch of terrible movies, but I made fun movies. Just go do it. It's like, stop asking for permission from someone else. And I kind of dug that. Where was I going with the whole thing? But the thing with the creativity and everything like that is like, it sparks, I find it like it takes a little while, then it sparks someone else's joy, because what you end up with is Toxic Avenger the musical, which if you haven't seen,
I haven't seen it, but I am aware that it exists.
I remember seeing that in Toronto, and I think I might have been one of the only people in the audience who understood the movie. Like, I felt like, because it was in a small run in Toronto, it wasn't like at one of the bigger theaters, obviously. It was a small run in Toronto. And I remember going and just like dying of laughter. And there was maybe like 4 of us in the audience who were just like, this is fantastic. And everyone else is like, I don't quite get what's going on. And it was just like, this is too bad, because this is absolutely fantastic.
Well, because with trauma, I feel, and with Toxic Avenger, it's probably more knowing people know the brand than have actually gone back and watched like the first movie. Because the first movie is, it's R-rated up to the eyeballs. It's absolutely insane. It's completely un-PC.
Oh yeah, no. See, this is the thing as well, and there's a lot of talk about like in comedy. Comedy is the first thing to age out. You go back and look at Friends now, which a lot of my friends did at the start of this pandemic. They started to go back and they started to rewatch Friends, and you start going like, there's a lot of cringy stuff that you just wouldn't make jokes about now. And you sort of realize like, yeah, it was, you laughed at it when it first came out, but now that's with what we understand and what we know and how we want to treat people. Yes, that's not something we're going to joke about now. So it is one of those things like, comedy tends to age out faster than anything else.
Well, it's really interesting to pull in something that I know we're both into as well, that that is from your native country, The Kids in the Hall. When I was speaking to Scott Thompson, and he long before they announced it publicly, he let slip very loosely and freely that they were coming back to do their sketch show again for Amazon Canada. And what was really interesting about some of the stuff that he was saying, because obviously he's probably the most outrageous of the kids in terms of what he'll say and what he'll do, is that all the other kids, and I heard Kevin McDonald talk about it recently on an interview, was saying, yeah, we will still be playing women. And there was even some question around them playing women, like in the new show, because the idea of drag and the idea of men playing women and the idea of like mansplaining who a woman is or whatever, has now obviously become a big a big thing. But Scott went, of course he did, went one step further, and he was like, because I talked about the fact that he plays a First Nations character in Death Comes to Town, and he was like, oh yeah, I would do that again. Like I would do blackface, I would do brownface, I would do, and he was, but he wasn't trying to be offensive. He wasn't trying to be racist. He didn't see it that way. He saw it very much as, you know, we're a comedy troupe, right? We're a theater troupe. We're a comedy troupe. We do this thing. We portray who we have to portray in order for the conversation or the joke or the sketch or the whatever to work, right? And yes, we could pull in a bunch of other people, but those other people are not the kids in the hall. The kids in the hall are like us guys.
It's difficult. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm not sure what the right answer is.
No, neither am I. I totally was conflicted when I finished the interview. I was like, I don't know where I stand with that now.
Yeah,
sorry.
And no, but it's true. But it's that thing of you know, I understand what he's saying. I just don't know if it's right, and I think that it does become that question of. It's difficult to sort of look at comedy. It's difficult to look at comedy groups that have been around and they come back, and you know, does it make sense to do the same sketches in the same way that you've always done them? Is it still funny? Is it still appropriate? And I'm not sure if we have a solid answer for those things, because I know a lot of people who are going to say no, and I know a lot of people who are going to say yes. And you know, you have the members of the troupe who are like, well, this is what we've always done, and this is why you love us. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of hard, but is there a way for you to change the sketches and still have us love you and still be funny without doing what you were doing? And right. I think that's a difficult question to really answer.
But like, just like Scott also said, he's like, other people in the troupe have played gay characters on the show, and they're not gay, but they've played gay characters, and not always gay positive characters.
Yeah, exactly.
But so, and I don't necessarily want to go down a whole serious thing. I just brought it in because, like, no, because the kids in the hall I know is something that obviously like we're both into, but it's also something that played into where you were talking about with the whole kind of comedy then and comedy now, and I totally get from like a almost like from a comedy purist / free speech place where he's coming from, and also knowing, having rewatched, because Mill Creek in the States just released them all on Blu-ray. I had them all on DVD anyway, but Mill Creek just released them on Blu-ray as well, because I'm insane. I was watching them again, and like, it's not like any of those things that they ever did were, the joke wasn't about like what race they were playing or what sex they were playing or whatever. Like, the joke was more sort of surreal or or more kind of commonplace almost than that. Like, it was never like a joke where they were like, oh, women, eh? You know, it was never that thing. It was
just the phrase. It was just the construct around the scene.
Yeah. So it's just, it's interesting, and it will be. I mean, obviously they're writing it at the moment, and it won't start shooting till after quarantine, if indeed Amazon Canada even still wants it then. But
I think much like the rest of the world, we are going to need a good laugh.
Yes, I agree, and I hope so.
I think if Hollywood is working right now in terms of like writers, I think what they need to focus on are some really good comedies, because I think that is, when we come out of this, we are going to need a laugh, and we're gonna need some good escapism.
And it's, I don't know whether you've noticed that. I mean, you work in TV news, so obviously it's maybe a little harder for you to find on a daily basis. But and I understand that like Twitter and Facebook and so on are really just microcosms a lot of the time. They're not really how conversations exist in reality. But I think that definitely growing up with like the comedy that you and I grew up with, or even the movies that you and I grew up with, laughing in the face of adversity is like what British culture, and by extension almost what Canadian culture is about. Less so American culture, but certainly British culture, and by extension kind of some of the weird Canadian stuff. And I feel oddly that while yes, satire seems to be continual, or the American form of satire, which is really just pointing out how mad and stupid everything is, it's sort of a weird thing. I don't know how I feel about American satire, but because it seems very obvious. It seems fish in a barrel type thing. But I don't know that laughing in the face of adversity thing exists in the world, or certainly in the generation now, and we need it now more than ever. It's kind of what
I think. So I think it is. It comes around every now and again where you need to remember that we can get through this.
Yeah, totally.
And usually the best way to do it is with a laugh. I think, it's to quote a really, really bad movie. It's not actually hit that from that movie, but it's a general quote. But from Van Wilder, you can't take life too serious. You'll never get out alive.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like that's kind of, that's more or less the way I grew up, was just,
totally.
Take life with a pinch of salt and a pound of sugar.
Yeah. Well, gallows humor is the best. Having like a dark, weird sense of humor, and gallows humor is the best. And I feel
singing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life" as you're nailed to a cross.
Right.
Watching that as a child has a great influence on you later in life.
And it really does. I almost want to make it mandatory viewing for children. Because if you grow up with, and I was talking to my mum the other day about this as well, like I can only trace it to Python and can only trace it to kind of British comedy, but I don't ever remember a time when I had any reverence for authority. I don't remember a time when I certainly had like fear of my headmaster or whatever, like when you're a kid, or your high school principal or whatever. Yeah, you don't want to fuck around in front of them, mainly because you don't want your parents to find out. It's got fuck all to do with them as a human being. But I've never had I've never had reverence for the church. I've never had reverence for school teachers or principals or whatever. I've never had particular reverence for politicians or politics or anything like that. And I don't know where, outside of Python and outside of some of the stuff I watched growing up, I don't know where it came from, because I can remember even as a younger, like pre-10 child, sitting in like chapel at school being like, this is mad. Is this what adults do? You know what I mean? Like just fucking just not understanding.
I will say that's where we deviate, because I did grow up with a good deal of reverence for politicians and for I grew up in a Jewish household, so it wasn't the church, but it was the synagogue and the clergy there. And there was a good deal of reverence, but there was still a level of, you need to ask questions. Like, it isn't just a matter of like what they say goes. It's okay, cool, this is what they said, but like, here's the reason why they're saying it.
Right.
And that explanation changes as you get older, because the explanation you get as a 5-year-old is not the explanation that works when you're 13, and then is certainly not the explanation you need at 20. The level of respect and everything varies, but it becomes more of an individual thing. So it's not necessarily a reverence for the overall institution, but it becomes reverence for individual people. So, yes, I don't have great love for all politicians, but I do have respect for a certain amount of them. And it is
someone earns respect. If like an individual earns respect or earns some, and by earn, I don't mean like a mafia style thing. I'm not being like, you got to fucking earn my respect. I'm not. I mean, if someone does something genuinely like noble or human or whatever, then I have. I don't mean to say I'm like some nihilist, but like I have appreciation and reverence for that. And there's certainly like creative people for whom I have huge reverence, but I don't think anyone is. I don't think generally anyone, and not from an egotistical standpoint, but I don't generally think anyone is sort of better than anyone or above anyone, or should. Most power is assumed, not actual.
Yes. Well, power is bestowed upon the person by society. It is not anything more than just, we choose, you decided to run for this job, but I mean, like, it's the same for anything else. I have a management job in the job that I'm at right now. That's because I applied for the job and I was granted.
So you are the power. Fight the power.
No. I mean, I'm one of. My boss hopefully isn't watching this. No, look, it's one of these things of, what we were saying. You've got to people earn it, institutions, and I feel the same way about people talk about loyalty to a company or something like that when they're working there. It's like people earn your loyalty, companies don't. So I'm very loyal to a lot of people that I've worked with over the years because they've shown me the loyalty and they've shown me respect and they've treated me well. That earns loyalty. But companies are a separate thing.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, and I sort of wasn't being flippant, just more that I was coming more from like a societal standpoint, the things that I was sort of, they try and tell you at a certain point where they're like, you do this on a Sunday morning, you do this when you're in front of whoever, and also not to say I wasn't polite or respectful. I was. It's just. Don't tell me something and then don't back it up. You have to back it up with me, and I'll drop you like a hot potato if you don't. I remember this. This is something that will always stick to me. You talk about the singing at the end of Life of Brian, as a kind of interested teen. I remember going up to our chaplain at school and saying, God, that sounds so fucking archaic in English. My chaplain at school. But no, I remember going up to him and saying, like, I really love Life of Brian. I've been reading about how everyone thought it was blasphemous and heretical and whatever. What do you think about Life of Brian? And I remember him saying, I think it's a really funny film. My big problem is the end. And he said, if you had a film nowadays with a bunch of people lined up on electric chairs, singing Always Look on the Bright Side of Life, would that be in good taste or bad taste? Meaning crucifixion was a method of capital punishment, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, I don't know, like people lined up on electric chairs, like you could make that funny.
Honestly, like
I'm anti-capital punishment. I'm not, but I'm just saying, like it was one of those things where at least that's an intelligent answer to a genuine question. It's not just like, well, it's blasphemous and heretical and write it off, which a lot of church people were saying. It was actually someone who thought about it and went, as far as my moral compass is, it's all fine except the ending, because when people are being executed, they shouldn't be singing. That was his thing, which I totally respect.
I get that. I completely get that, but I'm kind of with you that I can picture doing that now and just having the zaps happen.
Right.
As part of the lines. And like it starts off as a choir and then it eventually just works down to one single person. Like that's where my mind goes. And because that is literally the upbringing that I've had from all the comedy. And it's just like it starts off as a choir and then just like zap and then like a few people and then it's zap and then a few little people and eventually it's just one person and zap and fade to black and we're out.
But it was the one time anyone in a religious costume had, and again, please, my opinions are my opinions. Again, I don't like I have to say this, but my opinions are my words and my opinions are my words. I mean no offense to anyone else and their either beliefs or opinions. I really don't. But I remember it was about the only time anyone in a religious costume had ever said anything that I found to be something that I could totally understand, totally respect, and seem totally intelligent. So you grow up with the British comedy, you grow up with the movies and things and horror comedy and things like that. My big three Canadian things, Kids in the Hall of Tragedy Hip and Maple Leafs, as you know. When did those come into your life?
So I will say I'm not as big of a Kids in the Hall fan. I was kind of tangentially aware of it, but I never found the humor quite resonated with me. Right. It was one of those things, like I remember walking through the halls of high school and a lot of the kids quoting it and that type of stuff, but it was never, and it was a little bit of snobbery on my part as well, having grown up with like Python and all of that it was just like, I'm more into this type of comedy. But but to what we were saying, like it affects the way you start viewing comedy. You want something a little more cerebral, and I found Kids in the Hall to be a little more juvenile, and it didn't play into I think partially the persona that I was trying to perpetuate at the time, and I think it didn't play into just it didn't click in. So I go back now and I sort of watch some of the stuff, and I'm like, I can see where I would have enjoyed it if I had sort of opened myself up to enjoying it. But yeah, I think for me, I spent most of high school around people that were just like looking to the past of comedy. I spent time listening to George Carlin and Red Fox and like, raunchier and more established comedians, because that was just kind of the stuff that I got into at the time.
Did you go through the Bill Hicks phase, or did you jump straight to Carlin?
So I jumped straight to Carlin and found out a bit of Hicks much later in my life. And
I went through the Bill Hicks phase that kind of everyone goes like,
yeah.
When you're a smoker in your late teens, it's like that's the thing.
And it's this crazy sort of thing of like, I don't remember how I ended up watching Carlin stand-ups, but I remember my brother and I renting Carlin stand-ups on a regular basis, and I had a whole bunch of his ones on CD and just like a whole bunch of craziness, because there was something about it that was just so awesome. And he had changed his act so much from when he started out in comedy, and he started to get into the political commentary. And I think for me, a lot of, especially even now, even before I got into this job, my interest had always been politics and kind of the way that it affects life, but I always loved political humor. And I go back now, and I'm a huge fan of watching a whole bunch of old politics stuff, but I go onto British sites and I watch like Have I Got News for You, which I thoroughly enjoy, not being English, not being involved in any of this stuff, but the commentary on the political system and what's going on there. And they comment obviously on world politics, but a lot of it is British focus. But there is a lot of love that I have for the fact that we live in a society where we get to make those jokes. Like, you to go on and lampoon the leader of a leader of a country, and it's just like, yep, this is what we're doing today. And it's like, yeah, it's all in good fun. It's there is still reverence for the fact that they won a political race, so they're in charge, but that comes with us being able to make jokes.
Oh yeah, totally. And it's why Trump is certainly, and I don't want to go there, but like he's certainly the one head of a country that I can think of in my lifetime who's gone, why is everyone laughing at me? Why does everyone keep telling jokes about me? Stop it. You're being so mean. Like, it's just, dude, this is like literally forever. Like not forever. Since Peter Cook stood up and took the piss out of Harold Macmillan, like from that moment onwards, it's happened. You know what I mean? Like,
I won't go into current politics. I won't weigh into these things, but I will say, like, I think it is a common sort of practice. I've got to imagine it even goes back further.
Jesters, court jesters and stuff in King's courts and stuff. But in terms of someone in popular culture standing up and ridiculing either the prime minister or the royal family
or the king or whatever,
like Peter Cook was like,
and I feel like it is part of our nature.
Or it should be part of our nature. I wonder if it still is.
I think it still is. I think it still is. I think we need, as a society, to get back into sort of the habit of remembering that, comedy is a great way of pointing out the ridiculousness of human life. And that isn't a bad thing. It's just one of those things. In the same way, it's like, I'm a diehard sci-fi fan. And there is a beauty of science fiction of reflecting our society and our culture back at us through a different lens, so that we can really take a look at who we are.
That's the best sci-fi. The best sci-fi is the stuff that is really talking about whatever's going on today, but doing it with, spaceships or aliens or planets or the future or whatever it seems to be. I just watched Escape from New York again the other night, and I was like, wow, like all the stuff that they're talking about at the beginning of that movie it's kind of insanely prescient.
Oh yeah. I mean, and talk about a fantastically fun movie.
Yeah.
Okay, so going with the science fiction thing, this is a quote from Isaac Asimov, and it's one of my favorites. Individual science fiction stories may seem as trivial as ever to blinder critics and philosophers of today, but the core of science fiction, its essence, has become crucial to our salvation if we are to be saved at all. And I think it's just such a great. And I first heard that quote watching a sci-fi show, Stargate SG-1, which was their 10th season. But I think for me, science fiction became a really, really big part of my life because there was something so wonderful about seeing a vision of the future. Especially when you start, it tends to be a more utopian vision of the future.
Right.
But there is something about people looking at the problems we're facing now from down the road, and then trying to then sort of looking at it going, okay, I see what they were saying here, and looking for that allegory. Maybe it was intentional and maybe it wasn't, but I kind of like the fact that science fiction gave us that opportunity to envision ourselves as better people, but looking at the problems that we have as a society now and saying, okay, how do we honestly feel about this if we were looking at somebody else's society? And
it's sort of the one where I align with that, because there's certainly some sci-fi that I really love, but I can't claim that I've ever delved super deep into it. But I mean, obviously Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you grow up a Python fan, you end up reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yes. And he was still releasing books in that trilogy when I was growing up. So I remember the 4th and 5th and 6th book coming out. But Red Dwarf obviously was a big thing growing up. Star Trek, certainly the original stuff, and things like Westworld and John Carpenter stuff and other things, the original Westworld. But
John, my father just sent us an email.
Yeah.
Saying, we're all lounging around. Join me. I hear I'm being talked about.
Yeah, well, I mean, in good ways. In good ways. That's the man who brought Python to.
We can't join your Zoom meeting, Dad, but
we can join the Zoom. But no. But what we'll be derailed by a whole Adrian thing in a minute.
Oh God, yes.
The thing I always like to say, the reason why I still do the After Movie Diner and what I'm passionate about with the After Movie Diner and some of the movies that I talk about is I very much see the same thing in the movies that and your Isaac Asimov quote perfectly encapsulates this. Certainly within the 20th century or within like the end of the 60s, 70s and the early 80s, movie making, all the movies that the critics were deriding, all of them, whether it's cult films, exploitation films, the African American movies of the early 70s, horror comedies of the 80s, pure horror of like the 70s, the film brat stuff of the 70s, whatever it is, all those stuff that was like utterly derided by critics, that they all say way more about society than any mass Hollywood product has done in 50 years.
Yeah.
And what I love about the reason why, a lot of people now are looking for stuff to cancel, right? If there's tits in it, we've got to cancel it. If there's too much gore in it, we've got to cancel it. Whatever it is, there's certain things that people don't like about exploitation films, and I totally understand that mindset. But you also miss the fact that so often those movies are being made by the people who feel politically the way you do, or whoever's complaining about the movie. You hear any of the horror masters of horror talk about stuff politically, they're all where we are. They're not. Yes. They're not anti-woman. They're not anti-gay. They're not anti-African American. They're not anti. They're pro all those things, and they're actually making their movies to, yes, be exciting and exploitative and gory and weird and whatever, but also to, very often they were the movies that gave women starring roles, that gave African American starring roles, that had trans characters in them or gay characters in them or whatever it is. And so, like, while it's a vast swathe of movie making that people deride because it's considered B tier or cult or drive-in or whatever, I will champion that shit till the day I die, because it's like you say in the Asimov quote, it's the lesser critics that don't understand kind of what it's trying to say. And sci-fi is obviously the biggest genre for that, because sci-fi can detach itself either by setting it in the future or another planet, but then really get to the meat of a subject that's happening on Earth, whether that's
all right, you know what? We've been going for an hour, which is actually quite a bit longer.
That's fine. I went an hour and a half the other night on one of these shows. I don't care.
I'm actually going to have to bow out.
Okay, so no worries.
But I appreciate it. This was fun, and we should.
It was awesome. It was awesome, and we didn't even, like I say, we didn't even talk about the Leafs or the tragically hip. I tried to bring it in, but we were talking about other stuff, and the conversation went into a more interesting place than us just being like, "Oh my God, Gordon Downey was amazing." But
and again, it was another one that it took me a long time. And if Seth was watching this, he would be very angry if I said that I was a fan for ages, because it took me a long time to get into the hip, because they weren't my thing. I was really into bands like the Counting Crows and more like the folk rocky type stuff. And tragically
in Canada, is it sort of seen as a sign of like rebellion and cool to not be into that?
I wouldn't say it was rebellion and cool. It was contrarian, if anything. Which I think I spent a good chunk of my teen years being contrarian. As I'm sorry, I'm just like getting weird text messages.
It's all good. We can wrap it up.
But I mean, I will gladly come back and talk about the Leafs at some point soon, because oh dear God, I miss my hockey.
I know they've been playing the classic games and stuff, but it's
not the same.
It's not the same because you can easily look up the outcome or know the outcome based on stuff, or it's not the same as like rooting for the current team. I'm missing it big time.
But it will come back, and eventually
it will come back. But I was missing that it was like, we're going to make the playoffs. We might not make the playoffs. We're going to make the playoffs. We might not make the playoffs. There are no playoffs.
It was a typical Leaf season where we honestly had no idea where it was going to go. And then all Leafs fans just going like, please not Boston. Please not Boston. Please not Boston. Please.
Yeah, let's not get onto the Bruins. Anyway, Michael, it has been an absolute thrill.
Thank you very much
to have you on the show. You're welcome back anytime. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And great to dig into some of your fandoms. Are you bringing back your podcast at any point? And do you want to let people know where to find you on social media? You don't have
to. The Bar 42 podcast may show up again. I don't know. You can see the sign behind me. I did have a podcast for a little while that was cocktails and nerd stuff. I don't know, but if you want to look me up on social media, I am at Michael GTV on Instagram and Twitter. I don't tweet much, but I do Instagram a lot of my travels and just photos of everything that I kind of enjoy. So you won't see any pictures of me. Self-deprecating humor, the best kind of humor. It's an easy target that doesn't fight back. Anyways. All jokes. All right. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It was my pleasure, man. It was great. Thanks so much. And we'll do this again. Take care.
Absolutely. Take it easy.
All right. And